So Maria Shadrova, as you know, is you can see there international relations coordinator with the Baltic states. She was born and raised in Russia until the ripe age of 18. She moved to the U.S., where she joined the U.S. Army and served more than 5 years on active duty. She was deployed to Iraq for more than 15 months, but after serving in the military, Maria sawed off and joined a federal civil service career to work with the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force. In her experience during that time, she's worked as an operations manager, a protocol officer, and to the position where she is now as an international affairs specialist with the concentration in Central Asia and the Baltic regions. I mean, this career just culminates over 20 years of service. She holds a master's degree in international affairs. She is very passionate about world affairs and considers herself a student of history, and often likes to remind people that history is not dead or irrelevant, but rather an important aspect of why countries are the way they are. Maria will be providing us a protocol, pitfall perspectives, just for working in the Baltic region. Maria, over to you.
As Ladonna mentioned, my name is Maria Shadrova, and I am currently an International Affairs Officer for U.S. Air Force in Europe, specifically focusing on the Baltic countries. And I would like to take this opportunity as to perhaps share some of the insights that I was able to gain during my last 4 years as International Affairs Officer. I also think that protocol officers have a hidden soft power. Our ability to understand history and cultural context can really impact the decision makers by providing them with accurate and very detailed information, because sometimes knowing historical context or environment can really influence the way the conversations and negotiations might go and usually go. May I please ask you for the next slide? So to provide an overview, because very few folks in my experience have heard about the Baltic region, much less do they understand which countries are actually the Baltic states. So the Baltic states are Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Those three countries are very small in its size. Each of the countries approximately between 1.2 million people and 1.5 million people, so very small. However, this is the region which is full and with rich history. It's for many, many centuries, it was a path between German, Swedish, and Russian armies to go either up north or to Central Europe. So, but however, a lot of people make a mistake by assuming that these three countries are the same. They absolutely are not the same countries. Just because they border Russia, they are not Slavic people, they don't speak the same language. And if you put Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians in the same room, most likely they will not be able to understand each other. Each of the countries is very proud of their own origin story. And a lot of times people make assumptions just because these countries are small in size and population, hence they don't need to be taken seriously or paid attention to their history. However, these three countries, they did share quite a few periods of common history. Some of them were under the domination of Poles, Germans, Swedes, or in the recent history, Soviet Union. May I please ask for the next slide? Thank you. So why did I want to talk about the Baltic countries? Because these are the countries that are facing two different realities that are taking place at the same time. Each of the country in the Baltic region has approximately between one third of its population, or 25%, as in Latvia, or 15% in Lithuania, that are Russian-speaking population. Each of the Baltic country had to find a way how to be able to incorporate this population into its overall population, which seems like a very simple task. But when you think about it, especially when you taken in consideration the history and the difficulty, because a lot of Russian speaking people do not speak the native language of the country that they reside. For example, very few Russians who live in Estonia speak Estonian, and so on and so on. So during the early 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Baltic countries made different decisions as to what to do with the population that is not native, but it is left after the fall of Soviet Union. And when we think about things like that, these types of events greatly influence the makeup of the country, the potential way forward, as well as some social problems that might happen if those small parts of a population is not integrated with the native population. And that's something I think we see over and over again throughout the history. And that's why I think it's very important to always remember about things like that, that what makes a country strong is this society. And the way sometimes governments manage to incorporate minorities really matter a lot in the long run. And of course, a lot of Russian population, folks who remained in countries outside of Russian Federation, developed the hybrid identity, which is very complicated concept because they still speak a different language from the country where they live. However, their political and social values changed very much from their native or historical motherland. And of course, the history is still very much alive, and a lot of people still have a tendency to carry on and carry on with their assumptions that were current or relevant about 30 years ago. And the history is still very much alive, especially when you have such a large portion of your native population that sees and believes in very different things versus the majority of the population in each given country. May I please ask for the next slide? So Baltic states point of view. I think very often in different negotiations, we forget to understand or maybe appreciate the other side point of view. So on this slide, I wanted to provide maybe a little bit of what I meant by soft power that protocol officers have in their toolbox, specifically understanding the culture of folks that you might be having events with. It really provides a very rich and very detailed context to understand their decision making, especially if negotiations. And since a lot of us work in the military, a lot of it usually focuses around security or threat or perception of threat. So this slide, I wanted to emphasize some maybe the mistakes that were made early on between maybe the West, and we usually, when I say West in this context, I mean specifically Europe, so I'm talking about Germany, France, I'm talking also about NATO, and especially as a part of NATO, United States. The decision makers, what we refer to in the Western world. So the Baltic states have a very unique perspective because they, just in a short period of 30 years, they completely changed their structures, not only from a security point of view, but also their social norms, as well as their perception of how do they see the world and what matters. However, when we talk about it, they also have a very unique perspective on having to deal with a very large country that is perceived as your enemy, that has completely different point of view. And in things like that, sometimes I think in protocol negotiations in international affairs, it is very important to understand how and what exactly any country is going through, especially if you're trying to get them to be your ally in any specific or any matter for this. It can be any matter. It can be, diplomatic, it can be military, it can be economic, it can be trade. It doesn't really matter, but understanding context is very, very important. And in conclusion, may I please ask you for my last slide? So I would like to make the last 4 points, which I think are very, very important, especially when we talk about global affairs and we talk about how do we navigate this complicated world of different cultures, different perspectives, different perceptions, and especially different perceptions on the past, present, and the future. So, from the Baltics point of view, I think the really first thing to remember, and that goes directly to the protocol pitfalls, that just because the countries are in the same region does not mean that they're one and the same. Absolutely. And then the second point is that I also would like to emphasize that Baltic states might offer a good case study on how to integrate minorities into society who do not speak the same language and carry negative perception because of recent history and ethnic stereotypes. And I think we all can probably look back in history or even recent history or even present when we see and a lot of societies dealing with these issues. Baltic states can teach whole community how to navigate and coexist with a neighbor that has completely different set of values and sees the world from a vintage point that is so different and sometimes feels that it is about 100 years behind. And my last point is I also would like to emphasize that Baltic states' experience might provide a good starting point on how to reestablish relationship with Russia when the time comes. Because even in the last 100 years, Baltic states had to do it over 3 times in the 20th century alone. They had to do it right after the fall of the Russian Empire, then during the short period of independence, and then during the Soviet occupation. So with this, this is my last slide. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.